Okay, we are
Cool.
live.
So, hi everybody. My name is Jason Mojica. I grew up here in Memphis pretty much my whole life, except for the last 10 years, I guess. I am a level designer by trade, and I've been working in the games industry since I was roughly 19. So I have about 10 or 11 years experience right now, because I just turned 31, sadness. So these are the studios that I worked at. My internship, where I started at Gearbox Software, they make a lot of games. When I was there, they were working on the series called Brothers in Arms. It was like a World War II series. And then they started working on a series called Borderlands, and now I'm not really sure what they're up to these days. Then I worked at Raven Software for 4 years on a few titles. One called Singularity, Wolverine, Wolfenstein, and then 2 Black Ops games while I was there. So there's a lot of stuff in those short 4 years. And I'll touch base on those a little bit later. Then I moved on to Irrational Games, where I worked on a series called Bioshock. The game that I worked on was called Bioshock Infinite, and I also worked on one of the DLCs for that before moving on to Sweden, of all places, starting at a studio called Overkill, which was owned by a company called Starbreeze. And they worked on this 4-person player, first-person shooter called Payday, which is about robbing banks, which was a lot of fun. Until, I guess, literally December 31st or something like that, I left Sweden and moved back home at the end of January. So I've only been here for about a month and a half, maybe. So things are going really well. So just a quick thing to note, so Singularity is a first-person shooter. Like most of these, all of them except Wolverine are first-person shooters. And hopefully you guys all know what those are. Is there anybody that doesn't know what a first-person shooter is? And then Wolverine being a third-person game. It's like God of War, except you're Wolverine, and it's really bloody and gory, and you get to slice dudes up. It's actually a lot of fun. I have a lot of stories about all of these studios. It was a lot of fun. I learned a ton. Sort of like going from Gearbox being an internship to going to Raven. I think of Raven, those 4 years, as my high school years, honestly. I was a fresh baby in the games industry. I was really just kind of learning some basics. Just kind of like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I had a nice enough portfolio so that they hired me over like a bunch of different candidates. And I kind of learned some good lessons there at Raven. And then I look at Irrational Games as my college years. Those were really rough and tumble. The very, very professional environment. Lots of things were sort of like asked of you when you were there. So it was very strict and tough, but it was good. And I really liked it, and everybody there was extremely talented. And then Overkill, I kind of just joined as a senior designer, but then eventually they promoted me to lead designer on Payday, so I was a lead level designer on Payday, and I did that for like a year and a half or 2 years, something like that, before deciding to leave. But yeah, lots of really cool lessons learned. So, what am I doing now? Where do I work now? Well, I started my own studio called Wicked Hitbox. I just registered it last week, so it's pretty fresh. I don't have like a proper logo yet or anything like that. But I'm doing all kinds of work at the moment, creating small games, big games. Right now I'm working on a first-person shooter that's very Doom-esque, and then I'm working with a few of my other friends that I collected over the years on a VR project that's like a puzzle game, and then random workshop items for games like Counter-Strike. The game that I'm currently working on right now is called Proteus. It's sort of like a Doom-like game with really, really updated graphics. So everything's got dynamic lighting, normal maps, and things like that. But it's Doom gameplay, so it's really cool. And we have a lot going on, so you can check us out on our Twitter. I don't have links to that. Maybe if you want it, I can give it to you later.
Oh, when you say Doom, like you mean like it's like fast paced?
Yeah, it's essentially like
yeah,
it's essentially Doom. Like I mean, it's got the love of Doom written in all the characters, the guns,
right.
things like that. The layouts are going to be very similar. Something that I haven't really messed with a whole bunch in the past in my other first-person games was the type of level design that Doom sort of brought to the table, which is it's an old style of level design. It's very arbitrary and like random and stuff like that, but it's really nice in certain aspects. So that was fun. Yes.
Do you employ like what's it called, like the thing that chase you, push you to the level the player kind of doesn't go through? I forget what the term.
You mean like progression blockers?
No, like I don't know how the monster that follows you, so it makes it so you don't like just stumble around and not progress. I think it's called goal fishing.
I'm not really sure. Are you asking if I employ that kind of technique?
Yeah.
Or
how do you? Is there a technique that you use to make them like go through the level, or do you?
Sure. I mean, that's like a whole different. That's a whole different talk. Honestly, that's like 3 or 4 or 5, 6. It's like a year's worth of study, maybe given to you by a professional. But yeah, there's a lot of techniques to employ when you're doing level design that focus the player down an area or bring them towards it. I mean, in Doom, most of the time it was for progression on such a crazy big open level. It was like doors that had keys on them. You knew that, I needed to get the red key. So then when you found the red key, you just went back to it. Simple stuff like that. But then also, if you cleared an area of enemies, you knew that was an old room, and any new room that you found generally had enemies, so they kind of like directed you that way. They didn't really have good lighting back then, so they didn't really direct you with lighting as much as they do now. But that's functional lighting, and that's also a topic to discuss. Cool. So where had I started? And this is gonna feed back into the whole like how you get into the game industry. There's so many different options, but back 10 years ago, this was kind of the only real option for me at the time, or potentially to go to a really expensive college that I would be maybe in debt still. I know a lot of my friends that were animators went to I think it was Ringling School of Art or something, and they're paying off their school debt still to this day. Which is kind of crazy. But it's all on the path that you want to take and what you think you might get out of schooling. Schooling now is a lot different than it was before. So where I started? I started in StarCraft, of all places. StarCraft, Warcraft. I was building little RTS stuff back in the day. The main key thing here is that like I just started out as like for fun. I mean, it still is. I'm doing this. All of this is my hobby. It's not really work to me. But back in the day, I used to just make StarCraft levels and play StarCraft levels and just do editor stuff. My other beginning editor, level editor, was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Me and Elliot, as you guys all know, Elliot Boyette. We used to skateboard together back when Tony Hawk 1 came out, and this was like one of the first editors that we got to use. It was actually a lot of fun. And ironically, I had done like a remake of Woodland Hills, one of the maps, and I think it was Tony Hawk 1. I posted that on Twitter recently, and Tony Hawk actually liked it, which was really crazy. So I can die, I guess. So then I moved on to Counter-Strike 1.6. So this is when, these are some really old screenshots. I luckily still have a bunch of my old screenshots backed up on my website. These are just casual, silly aim maps, as they call them, where everybody spawns on one side and the other, and they just duke it out. There's no real gameplay. It's just like a kill box. And this upper left-hand screenshot is a remake of CS Assault. If anybody's familiar with Counter-Strike, there's an Assault level, and this is the winter version, and then Elliot and I remade the winter version and made a small version of the winter version. So it was a remake of a remake, which is kind of funny.
Now, all of this preceded your 19-year-old start.
Yes, actually. I started at 16 years old.
Gotcha.
It doesn't matter when you start. It's about like the drive that you have when you want to get into it and things like that. A lot of this, like, so I was still in school at the time, and then right after high school, after Cordova, my family was taking me around to different colleges and things like that, and I just wasn't feeling any of them, and they were very expensive. So I opted out and instead just worked at Malco, popping popcorn, and then one day I felt like my portfolio was ready. I'll show you like at what point I stopped basically and got a job or got my first internship. But it is quite a lot of work. You have to put in dedication. And my parents, back 10 years ago, were like, "You're wasting your time on computers," right? So, you know, that kind of thing happened.
What was the top one right called? I remember playing that one on Source before.
Top right one?
Yeah.
It's a remake. I didn't come up with the concept, but I mean, essentially, it's just a maze. It's called.
I played something
called
like
like Deagle
You
something.
had to climb up this thing. You could see everybody on top.
Yeah, it was just a remake using
Okay.
the Tundra WAD set. I think it was a winter. It was like the winter version of the Dust 2 set, or the Dust set. Let me see, what else do I have? I have like 30 things here. So yeah, then eventually I upgraded to Source, which was Counter-Strike Source, and this was my very first level I made. I found this on the internet just a second ago. When I was at Cordova High School, there was a small LAN place next to it at the time called LAN Matrix. It was like really long ago. And I made this map, and you can see my gamer name in the top left over here, made out of brushwork, which is like modeling. And on the other side is their logo. I had LAN Matrix written in the mountains as well, because I was doing levels for them and to get free LAN play. And that was fun. So that was like a while ago, but this is right when I was in high school. I got the job at Malco, made enough money to buy a small computer, and then just start working from there. And it was a lot of fun. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, and then eventually I started getting better at making levels and just doing silly content. And this was like some of my first models I ever made was like the hat from the Monopoly board and like the thimble. You actually play on the entire board, and it like one team starts over here and the other starts here. For some reason I have a German board. I don't know why. It was like the only high res that I could find with Google at the time. And you can see how bad my modeling was back then. None of this is smooth. It's all like just poly. It was really terrible. But just fun stuff. Let's see. Oh yeah, I made a PSP. It's like you're this tiny on the level, and you play against the other team. And the story behind this was that the terrorists are trying to destroy the pixels on the screen because the PSP had like lots of dead pixels on launch for some reason. So the joke story was that the counter-terrorists have to prevent them from killing the pixels. Yeah. So then I started doing more mod work with the SDK, Source SDK. That was what came with Counter-Strike and Half-Life 2. These are more of my models here. Some piles of paper, cabinets, textures. I just started really doubling down on my efforts to just do more things. I still, at this point, wasn't really 100% on what good gameplay was or what it meant. I just knew that I loved making spaces. Because if I look at this now, it's like, this is extremely cramped. There's too much in the way. There's no room for the player to move. It's like, there's literally just junk everywhere. It's actually really terrible. And the lighting's awful as well. Some more screenshots. I'm getting better. More brushwork. This was for a mod called No More Room in Hell. It was like a zombie mod, really old mod back in the day that I tried joining. Just because doing my own stuff was fun, but I really wanted to get like noticed more, and I really wanted to join like the top mods at the time so that I could get my work seen by more people. It was a pretty big deal for me. Eventually, I started joining in level design contests and things like that. There was some forums back in the day. They're still there, but they're not frequently used as much anymore. It was called interlopers.net. It was a Half-Life 2 community, and I joined in and won one of the contests using this piece. That was oddly very close to Bioshock themed at the time, so that's kind of funny. And this was, I think, back in 2008 or something. I think I had one more here. Yeah, so then just more screenshots of my work on the inside. Some Half-Life 2 stuff. You can definitely see that like I'm getting better at my lighting and my composition and all kinds of stuff. I think this was some more screenshots. Yeah, it's just more detailing, just getting better at environment art. Ironically, I don't even do this anymore. I just stick to like fun, good layouts and try to make the play space and the play experience strong and just fun. The moment-to-moment kind of thing that the player really actually goes through when they're playing your game is more important to me now. But obviously this stuff is important too. You know, you want your stuff to look good or else no one might play it.
Seems like the whole industry kind of shifted that way too.
Yeah, a bit. I mean,
or towards that way.
Yeah, definitely. You can see there's some differences in the new Doom versus the new Wolfenstein, for example. I think both of them are really awesome games, but the new Doom has such a good, what we call a meta game, which is like the underlying strategy that the player can jump into and just really dig their teeth into the game. It had a much stronger gunplay. Your choices were more meaningful, things like that. Yeah.
I mean, I would say that like I don't like the new Wolfenstein because I think the older one you could be like wandering around wondering where to go, and then you find it out, you're kind of rewarded. The new one tells you exactly where to go, highlights it. And I feel like that kind of takes away the whole like exploration part of it.
Definitely, and that they definitely kind of falter in that aspect. I mean, a lot of the newer games, there's a really famous image on the internet where it was like old games versus new games, and there's like a map of Doom, and it's all crazy.
You know, they have to have a cutscene in between.
Right, and they have like, and then the new games of today, it's just it's like one line, and there's just dots. They say cutscene. Wolfenstein, the new one is very much like that. Yeah. I mean, they do have amazing set pieces. I mean, this would be like where I would have ended up. I would have like, done environment art, something like that. Their team is actually pretty small, and ironically, it was made up of old Starbreeze people, like the company that I work for. Like they basically split off, and one went that way, and the other. But yeah, there's so much to be said about core gameplay mechanics and making tight gameplay. Not just having nice looking art, but I think the new Doom, because they made it in like a year or like and a half. They scrapped the entire game after like 5 years of work, and then finished the new thing, and it looks amazing. We could have a whole talk about that too, honestly. Yeah.
It's almost like comic strip artists. They have very simple comic strip drawings, but every once in a while you notice these guys can really draw too.
Yeah.
And if I hear what you're saying here, you can really create an environment. You just choose not to because you're focusing on the gameplay. But if somebody
or the page layout, for the comic or something, right?
You could.
Yeah.
You could verse over to it.
There's definitely we'll talk about the like the sizing of teams and stuff like that, because this might have taken me a few weeks to do. But that's just me, and I already had all the assets created. Well, most of it, I did some boxes and barrels and the textures and things like that. But overall, when you're looking at how much work this was for just what I did, that's not a sustainable business. You can't do that really. You would need to make it different down the road. But that's when you get into like AAA. Depending on if you're I call it quad A because some places like Ubisoft have like 3,000 something people, and they can just literally say, I need France to be made, and it gets broken down into like all the little departments versus, so we'll get to that slide. Right, and then I started doing some Left 4 Dead modding. I worked on a campaign called, I think it was Dead Before Dawn or something. It was a mall campaign. It actually got a ton of downloads. I was in the main map creator, but I did work on quite a few of the areas and like little fun puzzle bits. So that was fun. And then eventually I did some Portal modding. This was like one of my main menu scenes for one of my Portal things. It's just a lot of fun. I have a time-lapse video somewhere on my YouTube channel buried in all the videos. More stuff. And these things were these were really good exercises for me, you know, in learning about puzzle mechanics. I try and do a little bit of everything. You'll see like most of my, like a lot of my personal work nowadays doesn't have anything to do with first-person shooters generally. It's always me testing out new ideas, trying out new techniques, something that might help me later on. A lot of my personal work, I did a lot of scripting, which is you know, trying to, like, having platforms moving left to right, enemies spawning, things like that, trying to get better at, like, learning how to basically do visual coding for, like, the engine that I was using at the time. And I'm much more into gameplay mechanics now than layouts, but I'm trying to find, like, a nice balance. But all of these mods and maps and things like that that I worked on for so long helped me out quite a bit. So always try and, like, do something, you know, in your spare time. I actually finished this a few years ago. There was a little Portal 2 mod that I worked on called Spherical Testing, where you play as, I don't know, has anybody played Portal 2? In the game, towards the end, they have these little personality cores that are like, they talk to you and stuff while you're holding on to them. Basically, you play as one, like in a third person, you roll around, and it has like this was a big thing for me. I had a lot of fun making it because I made the character, I animated it. It has like feelings and emotions when you're going through this like traversal puzzle. He actually like gets scared and shakes and like looks at the screen, and they can fly over bubble traps and things like that. We went with this crazy pink theme of like science bubbles that are like bulletproof. So there's a lot of gameplay that happens with that, where you're floating in a bubble, trying to avoid lasers and things like that. So it's quite a lot of fun stuff, but it has nothing to do with first-person shooters. It's just something fun on the side. So that's basically where I got started, making Counter-Strike levels, moving on to all these different modding communities, you know. And when I was making those, you know, I was posting on the internet. I was trying to talk to people, other developers, and I found this forum a long time ago called MapCore back in like 2005 or something. And MapCore was a modding community, but it was owned at that time by a bunch of people from Gearbox. And you can see where that's going. They basically messaged me the week I quit Malco. Really funny. The week I quit Malco, kind of not on good terms because the boss was a huge dick at the time. The week that I went back, I was able to go, yeah, I'm getting a job in the game industry to all my friends who were like, yay, you know, it was kind of funny. But MapCore was the forum at the time that helped me get that initial push. And now, MapCore today, you can see all these little like screenshots in the back. This is all artwork and levels and things that people have worked on in 2017 and released. And the community now is mostly made up, I would say, mostly made up of professionals now from Valve, Blizzard, studios that I've worked at, all over the place. There's Overwatch, like I would say about 6 people on MapCore or something work on Overwatch in the level design and art. Like the main art look of the game, basically, there's a few artists on MapCore that basically that was their style that they kind of created. So it was really nice. There are some Wolfenstein screenshots. There's like a Payday thing here, some Portal 2 stuff. Yeah, there's just tons of games. We just recently did a Counter-Strike level contest.
Is that Borderlands? Is there?
What was that?
Is that Borderlands 2 right there?
No. I don't think anybody released some Borderlands stuff this in 2017. But we do have people that worked on it. But yeah, so just like people from all over. And I think if you're into making games and level design in particular, MapCore is a really great place to go. So it's just mapcore.org. And I help run that currently as well. And we're doing we do level design and scripting contests all the time. So if it's something that interests you, definitely check it out. Yeah, and then eventually, after all that hard work of modding and things like that, I got into the industry, and now I've worked on all these games for the last 10 years. And I still, during all this time, I still work on stuff on the side. I mean, that kind of schedule might get too much for some people, but I really enjoy working on games, so it's not too bad. Cool. So let me just take a quick sip here. Does anybody have any quick questions? Anything that I've talked about so far?
I'm good. So what do you do if, like, I mean, when I was a kid, I used to make champions for Dota 2. I mean, Dota 1. And then, like, I'm an idiot because I didn't think about saving all my work. So then, like, they like wiped it. So like, so what would you recommend doing? Like just redoing that again, or like recreating what you made, or?
Honestly, that falls in line with this slide in particular. My path, right, was a path of modding, finding games that I enjoyed playing, that I really liked to work on as well, and just making content with the tools that they provided. Or like sometimes people hack tools together and then you can make content for the games you like. We had a guy on Payday 2 who was a coder who made a mod that changed the way the economy worked in our game, and we ended up hiring him, and he worked on Payday for like 3 years or something. But yeah, modding's a way to go, you know. Some games don't have, you know, sometimes you want to go work at like Titanfall, for example, you know. But there's definitely ways to do that, you know, to cater yourself towards that company if you want to do that. It all really depends on like where you want to go as well. Yeah.
What would you say the most challenging aspect of level design is?
The most challenging?
Yeah.
Everything?
Thank you.
There's a lot to level design in particular, right? It's like learning. I'll get to you in a second, and then you. Level design's pretty challenging, but it's not such a behemoth that you can't pick it up. I mean, I feel like anybody can pick it up. Tools like right now, because my game Proteus that I'm working on is so close to the original Doom, I've just taken the original Doom and the level editors that people have made for Doom, and I've just started learning and making levels for Doom just to get a sense for how that feels, you know, and that's still valid. You can do that. I mean, people might look at your portfolio kind of like old or something, so you definitely want to have some kind of updated, but if you have levels like, let's say you made 10 levels for Doom, okay, and the community really likes them, that's good. You can have numbers on that, you know, and say like, yeah, I've got 1 million downloads or 10,000 downloads when everybody else is getting 1, you know, and these are the reasons, and these are my thought processes behind this layout and why I did it, and you know, it's not just I made a cool level and put this explosion here because it was cool, you know. There's so many different things that really make up good levels, or make up like why it's difficult or why it's easy, why it's fun. I personally look at level design in a very specific way, just like in how I design my layouts. Like, I have a certain philosophy that I really enjoy with level design, where like specifically layouts that wrap on themselves, where you start in an area and you can see the ending, or you know, like God of War, for example, they'll show you the vista and then you eventually make your way there, and then you might come back, but it's different, you know, you play through it in a different way when you're backtracking. I really appreciate games that take the time to think about their layouts, think about their gameplay, and reuse their levels and places in a smart way, so that not everything's just like a one-off. That's like my favorite type of level design. Okay. I'm gonna go to her first. What was your question?
Okay, well, this one is slightly a little more open-ended, but I remembered seeing the word Wolfenstein on there, and then obviously at that time, I mean, you were probably working on a different Wolfenstein, but I remember watching videos on YouTube about censorship in the video game industry, and I was just wondering if maybe you or somebody you know maybe kind of had to deal with that, like if you want to take Wolfenstein and sell it to Germany or something, but they don't like all this Nazi
specifically fun. Yeah, exactly what you're talking about. When we worked on I worked on the 2009 version, not the new one that's all like way better. The one that I worked on was like it was way back in the day. But yeah, anytime you do anything with, like, for example, there's not a lot of censorship in the U.S. Yeah, not a lot for pretty much anything besides like sexual content. The stuff for Germany is kind of like very specific. It's basically no swastikas anywhere in the game. A lot of the times they don't like you dismembering people or like having blood or something like that. I've been looking a lot into China recently because China's a really, really big market, and you have to go through the government with your stuff to get it passed, and they have some things like a simple thing like you can't have skulls or skeletons, kind of, because that's their culture is very derived from their ancestors and keeping them peaceful or being honorable about it, you know. So they don't want you to have skulls. They also don't like certain colors of red. You can't do that, and they had some other kind of thing too where they don't want you. They literally want you to remove all languages except Chinese. The more you play up their game, like if you have a Chinese character or something about China or in your game in a good light, that it's a lot easier to get your game passed that way. But
like Interstellar, the reason they use China and trying to help them out in the movie was because they knew that when they brought it to the Chinese market, they would get through.
right, yeah, they have different problems with the movies that they work on, but yeah, games kind of follow a similar path, and generally there's not a lot of independent developer stuff. Like you might find yourself making a game and then you can ship that game yourself on Steam or something. That's pretty much impossible at the moment in China for a lot of reasons, but you generally go through like a publisher and then finding the right one. It's very difficult, but in the US you basically don't have any censorship at all. Yeah. Back to the guy in the hat, because he was next.
I was going to ask, I mean, obviously level designing has a lot of design aspects to it, as far as like where you put things in level and how things, and like lighting and that kind of stuff. How much programming in levels go into it, like with you? Like how much of a programming background do you have, or do you really have?
I don't have a programming background, but I wish I did. I also am starting to look into it right now. I mean, it's kind of hard to get into it. It's a lot of work. But the guy that I worked on my, can I go back? No. Oh, shoot. How do I go back? Well, here we go. Yeah, this I worked on this with a friend of mine from Scotland, and he, during the project, went to school for programming, and he just finished and now has a job, and he's also working with me on the VR thing. Now as my programmer. So I kind of wish that I had done that, but a lot of the tools these days, a lot of the tools like Unreal 4 and Unity, they're much more geared towards people that aren't necessarily programmers. So Unreal, you have a thing called Blueprint. When I was in the industry working on like Singularity and Wolverine, we used Unreal 3, and they had a thing called Kismet that was like basically visual scripting. So you would have like an on-off switch, and you say once the player touches this box, what does it do? On, start, touch, turn off light, open door, you know, play animation, and you would have these little nodes, and you can do all this kind of stuff. And that to me is where my bread and butter is. I'm the most efficient when I have that type of tool. It's very quick for prototyping. By the way, prototyping is a whole new topic that like I could go on for days about as well. I have slides for that, so maybe I'll do a talk in the future if you guys like this one on prototyping, and we can break it down into other stuff. Like I said, I just did 2 weeks on narrative design, so I could probably whip up something small for that too. But yeah, I think it's useful. But like in my day-to-day, like I said, I'm generally okay without programming, mostly because I'm just doing layouts and like good placement. There's a lot of like higher design stuff that I'm good at that I'll do, and then I'll have somebody that is better at using Unity come in and code something for me. But it's exactly what I want, you know. Cool. You had a question.
Yeah, so I noticed that you started out doing these mods on your own, and then you just kind of switched up to doing it with the team. I just want to know, like, what part of modding these games with the team was better for you?
Well, everything in modding is better. Like, honestly, anything you do, like creating a Dota 2 character, anything, like, that's what you're passionate about. Like, if you're passionate about something, no matter what it is, in video game design, whatever, it could be just making textures, it could be programming, it could be making sound design. A lot of my friends who I grew up with and worked on, like, the zombie mod, they also got in the industry. Like, pretty much everybody that I've worked with in the past, of like Mapcore and stuff, all went to the industry and have worked at like several different companies now, and have got to meet a lot of those guys finally. But modding in general is always going to be beneficial to you. You definitely want to keep it kind of focused in because you can be self-sufficient in the future. If that's not the main thing you're going into the game industry for, then you're not going to really use it when you get into the game industry, because they'll have programmers. You know, you might love making textures and you know how to program, but if you get into the industry and you're doing texture work, you better not touch the code base, because those programmers are going to flip. You're like, yeah, I think I could just program a double jump, you know, because I think that'll be cool. They'll show you the door very quickly. So, but overall, I would say programming is super useful. So, yeah, my kids are going to learn programming at a really young age. Like, I'm start teaching them at like 6 or something. Like, this is a philosophy for how to do this. Yeah. Yeah.
You said that, you know, as a level designer, you can't really, you're not really expected to program. You put the programming team to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've learned is a lot of programming people don't like that the level designer doesn't know how to code a little bit.
Well, so coding and what I do is a bit different. So I'm pretty script heavy as well. So I can script my own basic mechanics through Blueprint or visual scripting. So it's very easy for me to just test out an idea and then show it to the programmers and be like, this is what I tested out and works. I'm not sitting there going like over like Joe's shoulder going, Joe, could you just tweak that to a 3? And then I'm like, make it a 2, Joe. You know? And I'm like, okay, well, maybe now could you change that to red, or I don't know, red doesn't work for me, blue, you know. I'm not sitting over somebody's shoulder like that. Generally, a lot of the times, I'll prototype an idea out, and then we'll do it. Like on Payday, one of the levels I worked on was a stealth. I did most of the stealth levels on Payday, and one of the ones that we had, I desperately needed non-static cameras that would detect the player, because they made the game too easy, because you knew exactly where they were going to be. So I designed this idea of I used the idea of a drone that could fly around the level and detect the player at random locations and like hover, and then it would turn on, it would view an area, then it would turn off and move. And because it was like a small train station, there was different rows, and then if a drone was in the middle of the aisle, you knew that you needed to stealth your way through the train aisles differently, and it kept changing up. So there was always something new or a different way to play the level, right? So this is a mechanic that I prototyped myself using just one of the static cameras. I had it floating in space. I had some light flicker. I played some noises. And then I had people play test it, you know, and I could just hide and unhide the visuals on the camera. So as soon as it would show up, I have like a big square hovering there, you know, with like a flashlight on it. And people got the idea, you know, the visuals of it at least. And then I was able to give it to my technical animator guy, my buddy, and I was like, yeah, let's make this. And that turnaround is pretty slow in Diesel. The engine for Payday is really old. So the turnaround for that was about a week from start to finish, but something like that in Unreal might take like 2 days. But yeah, so there's definitely, programmers don't like it if you walk up to them and just tell them to make stuff. That's never a good thing. Yeah.
We have a remote question. The question is Unity or Unreal, and why?
I mean, for me personally, it's Unreal, but a lot of people like Unity. I would say most people that go indie like Unity because it's really easy, it's very malleable. There's just a lot of there's definitely some things missing from Unity that you have to get from the marketplace, and then you're not sure if you're getting the right thing, whatever. I haven't used Unity long enough. I do like parts of it. Like the other day, I needed to take some footage of our menu screen, and I needed it to be full screen, and I needed to hide the mouse. And I just looked up full screen and mouse, but for some reason that was a default, or you couldn't do that in the options. But somebody had a script file that I could just plop into a folder, and it just worked. And then I just placed these 2 lines of code into this file, and the mouse cursor went away, and it was like, great, that was really nice and easy. You know, doing that, I wouldn't be able to learn how to code that into Unreal, but they have a lot of blueprint functions for that, so I can just do that in Unreal already. I don't have to worry about that. And Unreal comes with a lot of like UI stuff that you can do off the bat. I mean, there's just the quality bar that you can reach a lot quicker with Unreal, personally for me, and because sometimes I'm a one-man show, I have to do everything myself. Unreal allows you to reach a certain quality bar by yourself pretty quick. Like if you go to like ArtStation or Polycount or any of these other forums, and you see these really nice scenes made by one person, it's like, you know, you can do that with Unreal pretty, you know, with not as much effort, I think, as you might have to do in Unity.
I got you.
But yeah, it's just, my personal preference is Unreal. My buddy who's a coder that I'm working with right now, he is primarily Unity, and I had to convince him to switch to Unreal and learn Unreal, which was a bit of a snag. You could tell that he's not really enjoying that, but I think once he gets that up and running, my other friend that I worked with, who's an artist, is going to be doing stuff in Unreal a lot quicker, and there's just more options for us, at least in the high quality bar. Cool.
So when you're creating your level, when you're developing your levels, what are some of the difficulties that you come across? Like, do you think sometimes this might be too difficult for a person like a random game I'm thinking about, Celeste? Like, do you want to make it too difficult for everyone, or are you just like, if that's too difficult for me, should I dumb it down, or?
Yeah, so it always depends on the game that you're working on. If you're working on Dark Souls, that's a very tough question to answer. Like, is this too hard? But a lot of the times, you can kind of gauge the people you're working with by having them test out your stuff, or you know, there's always a tightrope, but I think there are some definite like hard lines where you're like, yeah, that I definitely did that, and I knew it was going to be kind of tricky, but then your personal preference is, I'm going to make this jump this wide, and you have to literally leave the edge of this and jump to reach the other platform. And a lot of people are probably going to miss that. So in reality, you should bring it to here, and then you'll only miss it if you fall off, if you just walk off or something like that. You know, there's definitely always a line that you have to walk. But having your friends test your stuff and getting your coworkers involved, finding out, you know, just somebody off the street, maybe not in Memphis, but I'm just kidding. Anybody watching the stream, don't come after me. But like, yeah, I'll get to you in a second. But yeah, there's always ways to gauge that. When I was working on Singularity, I might have another talk at some point where I can show you guys a AAA process of what it looks like, because I have an external hard drive with like I have like a ton of old footage from games that I worked on, like editor shots and things like that nobody really sees because it's private stuff. But at some point I might do a talk at that point, but we won't be able to stream it. We're gonna have to do it just in the room. But I made a puzzle for Singularity, and it was about like midway through the game where you had to fix an elevator by finding the right cog shape. It was like the elementary like kid game where it's like a square and a triangle, and you had to like hit the block and the thing. It was kind of like the inspiration for it, and it worked out. And 9 out of 10 people that played it got it. But then when they did playtesting, they just threw people who had never played the game before right on that puzzle, and they weren't getting it. And a lot of the managers up top were like, "Oh, I think we're gonna have to cut that puzzle." But it's like, it's puzzle that's going to be halfway through the game. Right. You're going to have all these things learned by them, but they didn't know that, or they didn't realize that at the time. So they ended up cutting it. But it was something that I took with me. You know, it's like, yeah, if you're going to have something difficult, you need certain people to play it. You know, that are, you know, if it's like halfway through your game, you should have somebody who's played your game or works with you play test it. You know, there's definitely a ton of ways to go about that. I mean, I've definitely, on a smaller note, small things like for me, when I'm working with the artists, when we're arting up one of my levels, the last one that I worked on before leaving Payday was this snowy banquet level in Brooklyn. And I wanted a very simple, just scaffolding to get to the second floor of this building, and I just put some cubes down, just big red 1 meter cubes, just so that I could, so that the artists go, "What's this thing?" And I go, "I need a staircase or something to get me to this window, maybe scaffolding," and they make it. Okay, so they remove the cubes and they replace it with some kind of art, and then I go back and I look at it with my critical eye of whatever. And I go, this looks good, but it's going to be terrible for gameplay. And them in their artist eye go, it looks amazing, don't change it. And then I'll go back and I'll explain why I'm so critical. You know, like this scaffolding is a little bit too far off the wall. If you miss this jump here, the very first jump, you'll get stuck behind the thing. It needs to be pressed against the wall. There needs to be player clip here so the player can nicely, smoothly go up. I even put some pallets here that were like kind of like a ramp shape. That still looked good, wasn't too crazy like a ramp, you know, to get up there. There's all these little things that I did. I moved some buckets out of the way, little collision pieces, and I just made it like butter, essentially. It was so smooth. You would just, yeah, you would just run up this thing, no problems whatsoever. The player's never gonna think about all the work and little tiny things that I put onto this scaffolding to make it work, because it works. And those are things that you'll gauge. Like the artist made it, and then I tested it out, and on my first jump, I couldn't get up on this thing. And I go to the guy, and I was like, yeah, I'm having problems with this. I need to change it. And he goes, well, I was able to get up on it. And I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's fine, but you're not every player, and I obviously had a problem with it, so we need to readjust the difficulty on this particular thing that's not supposed to be difficult. So I went in and just completely did it my way, and it ended up working out just great, and there was no problems. But those are the kind of things that you'll get through by playtesting your work, and that's more of a smaller example, you know, than what you were talking about. But there's things like that everywhere when you're working on levels. On a separate sort of note, there's a lot of questions that you'll ask yourself while you're working on games, and these are things that you'll get over your experience, and like as you make content and, you know, go through playtesting, you'll realize that when you're working, I'm going to place this tree here, but you're not just doing it because no reason. There's at least 3 or 4 different reasons you're placing that tree there. 1, it's good cover. 2, you need to block the light for some reason. 3, you know, it sets the tone of this space. You know, there needs to be a tree here in the center, a very grand tree. You know, 3, there's going to be a sniper in there later or something like that. You know, good spawn position. I don't know. But you're always trying to think of these questions to ask yourself and reasons for why you're placing something. But that just comes with experience, and that also goes into, is this too difficult, you know? And then a lot of the times you can break that down into the mechanics that you have, like your jump heights, jump spaces, shooting ranges, like things like that, for first-person shooters specifically. You had a question?
Well, I was going to add on what you're saying. One thing that I learned from game design from Shigeru Miyamoto, like the one of Mario Zelda, he says always start like in the middle, where he thinks is like his level of difficulty.
Yeah.
And works backwards.
Yeah.
So that's like when they made Ocarina of Time, they made the forest level first before they made the Kid Link ones, and that's why forest level is one of the hardest levels when you're playing the game. When you get to that, the difficulty just spikes dramatically. People like, and not in the water temple, but that's another story. But like, they did it on purpose because they want that. They designed that one first and then work backwards.
Definitely.
Because they want that, like, then what's next to be like
Sure.
a wake up call. This is more difficult now.
Not only that, but one of the main reasons to do that now, at least, or always, is because your beginning stuff is always going to change. Your mechanics will change, like your middle to ending mechanics. Like you're going to refine those, make those really nice and sick. Those are going to be the core mechanics of the game. And then when you need to teach those mechanics, you know, if they change the jump height and now they're like, oh, there's double jump and you got to teach double jump at the beginning or wall climbing or something, that's going to change how the initial level of your game gets played. So starting at the beginning is always a mistake. Even in things like sometimes like in writing or, you know, making a movie maybe, there's sometimes starting in the middle of even in your level that you're working on, starting in the middle is a good idea and then working your way back. Just because things change quite often and you need to be very agile. So yeah, he's definitely 100% correct on that. I mean, yeah, I would definitely work that way as well. I mean, I've worked that way. It's a good way to go. Yeah.
When designing your levels, what design philosophy do you use? For example, how Mario would add on, so for each level it would have one object and it slowly expands on that idea for the object. So
that's definitely one of the guys that I'm working with right now worked on. He was like one of the directors on Metroid Prime and some of I think the 2 Donkey Kong Country games that came out for the Wii and the Wii U. And one of their approaches too is it wasn't a gimmick they were calling it, but it's essentially that is one way of doing it, right? You get the idea. That is a philosophy of design or for like their particular game, right? You want to get the idea that's really fun, that can be malleable, that can expand and shrink to like have different challenges. Like if you had 2 of these, is it going to be more difficult? What if you do this with this thing and this with this same idea? Does it present a different idea completely, you know, that you can change and flip on the player? So once you have a lot of these ideas, you know, then you can kind of break down that one idea, the beginning idea, break that down into its most simplest chunks. And that's just like good design practice in general. I don't know if it's more a particular philosophy, but it's definitely like a good way of designing versus just like assuming the player is going to know this for these reasons, you know. Yeah, that's definitely you definitely want to like plan that stuff out. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was meaning, what when designing level, what are you thinking about?
Well, depending on
the gimmick, and then you build the level around the gimmick.
Sometimes, yeah, actually, definitely. Sometimes you want to have a core idea, a strong core idea. You know, like in military games, sometimes we're going to make an airfield, and then you're like, okay, well, what's going to be the coolest thing about this airfield? Is it still active? Are there planes still like coming and going? And you have to stop the terrorist from getting on the wrong plane, or stop him from getting on the plane, you know, and then finding him and like, you know, what's going to be interesting about this scenario. It's really just either you or your lead, someone's going to give you an idea, and then you have to find what's cool about that idea. You know, find something that you can branch from, because if you don't have any ideas, you know, or reference or whatever, then you're kind of going in blind, and your stuff is going to be a little subpar to what it could be. So finding a gimmick, you know, like the water temple, raising the water and lowering the water. I'm sure they thought that was going to be a really sick idea, but then, and the temple itself, like the way that it was structured, just was a bit too mazy, you know, and that was just unfortunate. But the gimmick was there, or the idea behind the whole temple, and then having these boots that you could turn on and off through the menu for some reason, that would shrink, like make you sink and go up. It was just it was an interesting idea, but I think in the end it didn't execute as well as they had hoped. And I think with a little bit of more planning or abilities that they had to make that more interesting, it could have been a really cool level. But yeah, there's always something that you want to grab onto when you're thinking about your content. That's definitely like in anything that I work on. You need something to start from, right? Yeah, it's a good philosophy.
Cool.
So what path best suits you, right? Should you go the schooling and internship route? I feel I'm not really like hypocritical getting up here and telling you guys to go to school because I didn't. But and I do find that funny, by the way, going to schools and having talks. But yeah, but there's a lot of new stuff, new schools, sorry, that are out there now that are much better at teaching you games and levels and things like that than in the past when I was getting into the games industry. It was just the community and learning off of people in the community and the best. You basically would find the person who was the best in your class or in your forum and then follow their work and figure out like what they're doing or what techniques are they employing. That's a different discussion too, but the idea of playing your favorite games and breaking them down and like learning what works and what takes about them is always a good way to go. But schooling will help you kind of like jump past that in some of the aspects. The school that I taught at in Sweden, in Stockholm, for 2 weeks is called Future Games, and they're run by the government. So the government pays for I think the level design course. So I had about 30 students that day for the 2 weeks. But some of these other places, like for example, the Guild Hall is probably one of the longer running schools in the U.S. That's really good for games in general. They're in Plano, Texas, next to Gearbox, or I guess they were near Gearbox. So Gearbox used to suck up all the Guildhall kids. And then I think DigiPen, and then obviously Future Games. There's probably a ton more now than there were back in the day when I was going. So you're gonna have to look that stuff up yourself. I wish I came with like some kind of recommendations, but unfortunately I don't have the knowledge in that. Maybe next time. I'll ask some of my friends. I do know that I think it's Parsons in New York or something like that. One of my buddies teaches over there, game design class. Obviously, modding and workshop creation, huge. If you're not going to school and you want to get in the games industry, like we've been talking about, modding for your favorite game or doing workshop stuff on Steam, or I mean, if your community allows you to upload like a weapon skin or a character or something like Dota, for example, I'm sure some of you guys play Dota 2 or League of Legends. A lot of those workshops now allow you to upload characters and effects and things like that. A lot of my friends on MapCore make Counter-Strike levels and get accepted into the Counter-Strike packs. And you can get a good chunk of money for doing a few months of work. It's really nice. One of the guys that I worked with made a really famous level called CS Agency that was in a ton of the operation packs. And eventually he moved to DICE. And a lot of the other content creators out there, just keep making content. And then they can put that on their portfolio that Valve chose them to go into an official level pack, and the community loved it, that's great. That's a really nice piece to have on your portfolio. The guy that, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the most recent Counter-Strike version, Global Offensive, there's a level called Cash, DE Cash, that was created by one of the guys in the community who used to be a semi-professional player named Sal, and he works at Riot Games on a project over there. I'm not sure what he's doing. It might be unannounced, but he made that game, and that level got included into the actual game itself after somebody from the community picked it up and arted it up for him because it used to not look so good. Yeah.
So what do you do if like some companies in the industry aren't legally allowed to look at custom content?
What do you mean? Say it again.
Some people in the certain companies are not allowed to look at custom content. Sometimes, like they can't look at forum content. Some of them have like rules against that for employees.
Oh, you mean after you're employed, not beforehand?
Before, like say like I work at Gearbox. Some employees at Gearbox can't look at modded content because they don't want to someone say, oh, he stole my idea, and if someone copied your mod. Sometimes you're not allowed to look at that.
I'm a bit confused. Are you Are you saying that like they don't want to hire people from the community because then
I mean,
if they come out with something later on, then
No,
it's
no,
going to
no,
look like they're taking your idea?
like how can you show people in the industry your work if sometimes they're not allowed to look at it due to legal reasons?
I've never heard of that. You're going to have to give me a company example. I've never heard of that before. I mean, you're always going to find people like, I mean, me and my buddy John, we wrote, I was huge into Twisted Metal. It was a car demolishing game back in the day. And me and my buddy sent off like a really long document or a big document that my mom drew some cars and like we had like game design ideas and all this kind of stuff. And we sent it off after Twisted Metal 2. And lo and behold, like years later, when Twisted Metal Black came out, there was a lot of stuff that we had written in that document that we sent. Like we only had one copy of it, but like we sent them that. A lot of that stuff was in the game, and it was really awesome to see that. But I'm sure it's 100% coincidence. I mean, a lot of it was like kind of generic ideas, but like I still don't think that I don't think any company out there would not look at your modding content. I mean,
I know EA will they'll like send you a C&D letter sometimes, but some other companies don't.
Well, you're talking about like if you're making something that's similar to their game or that is like a mod of their game that is going to be a big deal or something, they might send you a cease and desist. Like when people were working on, when Blizzard made, I think it was like one of the new Warcrafts or, I think it was, I don't remember, but they had an editor that was out there and people could make whatever they wanted with it. I think it was Warcraft 3 or something, StarCraft 2, yeah. The editor came out and you could do pretty much anything you wanted with the editor. And, you know, I know that from experience using their older editors, that you can get some really cool craftiness in there. And somebody decided like, oh yeah, Blizzard never finished this game called Ghost. It was about being a sniper, you know, in the StarCraft universe. I'm gonna make Ghost, and they made a mod that was like you play as a third-person character, and they went crazy. And Blizzard was like, sorry guys, you're gonna have to stop. You know, that's totally different though. You're talking about sort of like, different things. But no, I mean, if you apply at a studio, they'll look at your work. I mean, the programmer that we hired on Payday made a skin modification that we didn't have, that Counter-Strike had. It was like, he's like, I want to make skins for Payday. So we built a system that allowed people to create custom skins for the guns and stuff like that. He didn't know that we were already working on one, or we had the plans to make one. So we just hired the guy, and and then he just made his system again or something. It wasn't like we sent him hey, stop making this really sick mod because people are going to stop playing our game. It was just one of those things. Yeah, so it's not, you don't have to be worried about that stuff too much. Yep.
Back to the internships. So I'm currently a computer science student here.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering what the best way or route to go about to try to get an internship at a game studio.
So unfortunately, if you're looking for an internship nowadays, that's actually one of the positive reasons to go to schooling is they have, depending on the school, they probably have a lot of fingers in game companies that are like, hey, our new students are about to finish. They're working on their portfolios the last day. Boom. They'll have like a, hey, come and hang out, or the studios will all get called. In Sweden, because Stockholm is like really tiny. It's like Memphis. There's every AAA studio is literally like there in Sweden, and some of them are actually like, I would say 4 of them are in the same building. It's like Avalanche, Paradox, DICE. They're literally just on different floors, or across the way. You can wave to your friend. There's a lot of funny rivalry things where people put post-it notes and stuff. It's just good fun. So sometimes that's the best way to get an internship or directly at a studio, is to work really hard when you're in school, and then they'll have a thing like that. You always want to make sure that the school that you're going to go to does that. But internships can be kind of rough because a lot of the times you don't get paid. I would say I got a special internship when I was at Gearbox because I was interning to get a job, versus A lot of the interns come for a little bit, like a few months, and then they go back to school, and then they don't get paid. But I actually was getting paid, and I might have been a special case at that time. But yeah, to get an internship or to get started, I mean, hopefully by the end of your current things that you're doing, you know, you've got stuff that you've been working on, you know, that you can break down into a portfolio. If you're a programmer, it sounds like you are. You've got a GitHub account with your stuff. I just learned about GitHub like recently, but my buddy was like, "Yeah, you should host your website on GitHub and put all the files up there because they do a free website hosting thing, and you just have to have the domain." And I was like, "That's crazy." Yeah, hopefully now you can use GitHub. People can open your code, they can look at it, they can play your game right away, they can even test it on the fly. You know,
one thing about GitHub though is, what is it? They limit you to like 2 gigabytes or something for repository. What is it? It's very low.
If you pay for it.
You pay for it.
Yeah. Well, you know, basically, like right when you're about to start applying places, if that's something that's really important to you, that space, you know, maybe just do like a quick purchase of like, you know, for like 1 month, you know, you're going crazy ham talking to all these people. You need them to see your project, or you burned it to like a floppy, like a thumbnail drive. Like I've carried this thing around before to like places. I had my mods. Like I went and had an interview with Valve at GDC once, and I just had my laptop there, and I just sat with one of their designers, really cool guy, and he just walked over my Portal levels with me, talked to me, asked me like what I was thinking, asked me some really hard like BS questions that like I wasn't going to be able to answer, which was really great.
There's also a place like UT Connect that are kind of like the LinkedIn of game development, trying to be the LinkedIn of game development.
Yeah. Honestly though, but like also to get an internship or to like just start getting your stuff noticed, you know, start posting it. That's like back in my day, that was the best way to do it, was to post on Polycount, to post on MapCore. If Level Design specifically are games, you know, there's Unity forums, there's Unreal forums, there's whatever. I mean, there's game makers. You can go to like subreddit for like indie games or gaming, you know, and you're like, I've been working on this in my garage for like 5 years. What do you guys think? And maybe it takes off and people love it, and then you're gangbusters. But that's pretty rare. But it's still good to start. You know, start a Twitter account, get people seeing your stuff. I mean, I'm just kind of like jumping on this whole media thing. I've literally created like 1 million accounts for like this Proteus thing over the last like few months, and it's a lot of work to keep up with too. Yeah.
Talking about money, what's kind of like an average way what you talking about, like for a game developer, mod developer, or designer type of thing for different pieces?
You mean like
somebody maybe starting out, and then maybe somebody that's like a mid, and then somebody that's like.
That is literally going to change per state, per city, per game studio. When I first started out at Gearbox, they're kind of like low end pay for all of their employees. Like a lot of people were at $32,000 a year, but it was because the area they lived in was really cheap as well. You could live off $32,000 a year like a king where they were. And then I remember posting that, and my rival at the time on the forums was like, I got a job at Infinity Ward, and I'm in California, and I'm getting $54,000 a year. He's like, what happened, man? Like, he was like, you know, joking at me. 54,000 is poverty in California. And I don't think he knew that at the time, but that's like, you're barely making it, okay? And I was living just fine in Plano on 32, and I was able to buy like, I was like, my first paycheck, it was like $1,600 a month or something, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go buy an Xbox and like games, and like my rent was like $500 a month or something. It was gross. I mean, so like it really depends on where you go, what the studio's like. For example, Starbreeze is not well known for good pay in Sweden. I took a huge pay cut when I went here. Mostly I wanted to go for, there's a ton of reasons to go to Europe and explore Europe and like live there and try the different cultures and like different studios and things like that, opportunities. But yeah, I took a big pay cut going there, and students who just start out, they have like a hard rule that you essentially start out at 21,000 a month. That's in Swedish kroner, which I don't actually remember what that translates to. I think it's like, it's pretty low, but that's kind of like on the lower end scale. But if you start in the basics at DICE or something as a level designer just starting out or getting out of school, sometimes they start you at 30, and between 21 and 30, that's a huge deal.
It's per month.
Yeah, per month. That's
21,000 is $2,500 a month.
yeah, but then the taxes in Sweden are like gigantic because everything is like the healthcare system and stuff like that is free, and it's really nice. It's a good trade-off. But yeah, I'm trying to think of. There's a bunch of gaming magazines, or like I think it's like GameIndustry.biz, or there's some Game Informer, or I don't know if it's that one, but there are some game magazines and websites and things like that you could just look up. You can look up salaries for starting out level designer, or a senior level designer, or a lead programmer, or a game director, creative champion person, whatever. And you'll see, with 3 years experience, you're looking at $40,000 a year, and then you just have to think about where that studio is located and what the living cost is. Because if it's really cheap, they're probably going to pay you on the lower end, versus if you live in Boston, like I was at Irrational Games, it was on the higher end as well. I think I was making 78,000 a year over there as just a level designer. I wasn't even technically senior at the time, working on when I started at the studio. But yeah, the seniors make more. And I know depending on the studio, like Oculus right now, like Facebook, if you go work there and you've got a lot of experience, you'll be getting paid well. I know that really well. So it really is per studio, but it's kind of based on the years and the titles and things like that. It's a big question, actually. I hope that helps, though.
It pretty much says I need to design my own game and get it out there and make the big bucks up there instead of trying to get a job at a studio.
Well,
because in fact, I'm already, like I said, I already have a very good job. There's right now that's not even in the realm of what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the thing is, my job is not challenging. I said I love playing games. You know what I'm saying? Because it just keeps my mind going.
Definitely.
I can do what I do day in and day out without even blinking an eye.
Yeah.
But I make good money.
Right.
So that's what I was trying to say. It's like, well, what I'm saying, I really love working on games.
Right. So it is for me that yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, according to Stack Overflow, the average salary of a graphics designer is $40,000.
That'll go up to, like, the programmers generally make more.
Graphics programming is $45,000.
Yeah.
But that's based on their developers.
Yeah. So in your case, like, you're kind of in a similar situation that I was in too, where you can do this in your spare time, or you want to have the, it's all about having that drive as well. Because like I got to the point where I was making levels with my eyes closed. I was just making levels, good stuff, pumping it out. Like Payday had a very aggressive schedule for releasing levels. It was like every 2 months I was making a new level and shipping it out. Whereas working on Bioshock Infinite, I had 3 years to finish all the stuff that I was working on. So once you get into this certain mode of making stuff and just getting it out the door, you realize that like it's actually pretty simple, and then you're like, okay, well now I'm bored with what I'm working on, this high octane lifestyle. I need to like do something different. So it's kind of like one of the reasons why I decided to go and do my own thing, because I was like, yeah, I should just do this, and then I maybe get lucky, maybe don't, whatever. My wife has a job here now, so she's basically paying for both of us to live right now. I mean, there's all kinds of things. I would say if you're happy with, or if you're making enough money and you can get by without it like soul sucking you, versus like if you feel like you'd be happier just going full hog. It depends on your experience as well, but it sounds like you have a plan going forward, which is good. Yeah. Yes.
So what would you say has like the longest tenure in the industry? Because I know that it's kind of short, especially if like you get it. I know like League of Legends, for example, a lot of the original designers for the first like 2 years are no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like all bunch of new designers. So like what?
That's up to you personally. I mean, I would call. There's a lot of people that I worked with at Raven who are there to this day. I just saw them having their their annual pie eating contest, and the guy that I sat next to just won. So, I mean, there's people who will stay there for life, you know, and they'll eventually hit their salary cap, you know, and it's up to you to make the decision. If you're happy with where you are and you're okay with your pay and whatever, then just stay, you know, whatever. If you love working at the studio and the people, then do it. People leave and change jobs for all different types of reasons. In Sweden, like, you'll be on this floor at this studio at Paradox, and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna salary jump, and you'll get paid more, I'm gonna go here. And then after about 2 years, you're gonna salary jump again back up to the top floor. So like, you know, you go back to DICE or whatever, and you kind of jump around to these different studios. That's just, there's all kinds of reasons to move or whatever. Sometimes studios close down. Me and a bunch of other people got laid off after Irrational finished Bioshock, the last DLC. They chopped everybody but like 10 people or something. And now they're just slowly ramping back up for their new studio that they've renamed it Ghost Story Games. But yeah, my wife and I knew going in that it was kind of potentially volatile. Like when the game was going to end, there was a high chance that they might do that. So I went in just going for the project basically and wanting to work on that. You'll ask yourself sometimes like, oh my God, these people were working on Overwatch. Like, why would they ever leave? You know, this is such a great game. Well, once you've been in the industry for a while, certain things mean more to you than others, and you know, different people, different projects. You know, it could be like the project of a lifetime, but maybe that person's gotten out of it what they wanted to, you know, and now they want to move on. So, I mean, it really is. I would say though that the U.S. industry is pretty volatile in terms of like how they hire and fire and their ability to do that, versus in Europe, which I didn't know until I started literally working in Europe, was that they have to have a really good reason to fire you, or to make you redundant or something like that. I mean, and that, to be honest with you, that takes a lot of the stress off of worrying about your job security, and then it just allows you to make content, which is really good. But like a lot of the like studios here will have high political games and things like that, or people are always trying to backstab each other in AAA. It's kind of, it gets to a point. That's a different discussion, but it depends. The longevity of how long you're going to stay at a studio or whatever. What I've realized is about 3 to 4 years, and I either have learned what I wanted to learn at the studio, or I'm getting things are stagnant or just like continually kind of, they feel repetitious, and I want to move on and challenge myself. I feel like it's really important that wherever I go, I challenge myself to work hard and to learn something new, or just to learn a new skill set, you know. So, yeah. Yeah, so let me see, what time is it right now? 7:20. So I've got like 30 minutes left, I guess. So I'll just skip some of these. Let me see. Other than that, like you said, you could do indie games to get in the industry, get noticed. You know, a lot of people who make their own games that might sell marginally well or a little bit can use that as leverage to get a job in the games industry. Even if they've played your game, maybe some people like reach out, whatever. That's always a good way of going. We're talking like Flash games, things made in Unity, Unreal. There's a thing called Game Maker. You can make your own engine. I wouldn't suggest doing that in this day and age. Making your own engine is kind of a waste of time unless that's going to be your job wherever you're going. Yeah, there's tons of options for that kind of thing. So where do you want to go? This is a fun slide. So differences in studios, right? So I worked here. I also worked with them. I even went over there at one point. I know people who worked at, I literally know people who work at all these studios. But there's a huge difference between Raven, Blizzard, Ubisoft, and Double Fine. I mean, like pretty much every studio kind of has a different culture. But what I mean is, so what I've jokingly would call quadruple A is something like Ubisoft, where and Blizzard, where they have a campus, and it's not like this room. It's literally the entire University of Memphis is your studio, and you are what I consider the cup placer. Your job is to make sure the entire city is covered with cups properly placed. That might be one of your jobs in a studio like that. And there's a lot of political games and those kinds of studios where you're basically fighting to have a better option to make your content or something. It's not always like that. I don't want to make it sound bleak, but more often than not, if you don't have enough experience and you go to a studio like that, you're going to be doing the low-end jobs that nobody really wants to do. So that can be kind of draining. But I have a lot of friends that work at Ubisoft. They love it. And there are also some that are looking to leave Ubisoft and doing their own thing, But it's a nice job to have. It's very secure because the government pays Ubisoft per person. Like they get a subsidy or something. I don't know what it is. But Ubisoft's always opening up more positions and trying to get more people. Then we have studios like that are just what I consider just regular kind of AAA. That'll be like around 300, maybe more, like 400, 500. You're looking at Epic Games. Raven is roughly about 150 people. Maybe they've expanded a little bit, but we had 3 teams. Each game was working on 60 people, and that was really nice. Blizzard's also like one of those giant conglomerates. Treyarch, Infinity Ward, they're like 150, 200, 300. And then Irrational Games was 300 when we ballooned at the very end to ship Bioshock Infinite out the door. If you're a part of the core team, that's always a good thing, and that's always fun. And you do end up having your own work. There was like 10 or 15 level designers all doing different projects and things like that. So you end up. I think those are my favorite sizes. Is those AAA studios. The smaller end studios, like if Raven split each of its teams down, that's something that I enjoy a lot more. This the small studios. Like I would say Double Fine is a small studio. They probably have like, I would say they're probably around 30, maybe more. But they have to budget themselves pretty strictly because they don't have like a secure cash line coming in. So they're basically dependent on the games that they ship all the time in the community and Kickstarter and stuff like that. But Double Fine's a really great studio. If you go there, you're probably a jack of all trades to some degree. You know your way around your editors. You know how to like make art. You know how to make good levels or mechanics to work there at the smaller studio. And then yeah, you got a question?
Yeah, speaking of jack of all trades, I remember watching this video from WatchMojo.com that kind of talks about some of the things you need to know about getting into the gaming industry, and one of them is when you're applying for a job, you kind of have to specialize.
Be more specific. Yes, yeah, sure. On like this up, I would say it's good to be a specialized person. Even at Double Fine, you need to be specialized. You need to be their go-to like special effects artist or visual effects guy. But the fact that you know a ton of different stuff and like how to make games and prototype, that's actually really good for a small studio like them, because you might go in for a specific job. Like my buddy Jeremy, who I worked with at Raven, he left and went to I think some other studio, but then he eventually made his way to Double Fine. And when I visited him, I was checking it out. It's a really nice space. It's a little longer than this room. But they fit everybody in there, and everybody's got their specific job. We've got the programmers, but everybody can kind of do a little bit of everything. They're not a master in everything. They're just good at knowing a little bit of everything. And I think that's important when you're applying at smaller studios, for sure, that you're not just the cup place guy. Or you can't apply at a smaller studio if that's all you've been doing. You need to have knowledge and everything, but be a master in one thing for sure. Yeah. And then yeah, the smaller indie stuff is really good. There's like a fun little studio that just opened up called Polyarc. They did some VR stuff for the PlayStation. I mean, a lot of my friends are starting little smaller studios, but those are on shoestring budgets. Like you're living in your parents' house, or everybody's pulling money together or getting some kind of funding. They usually have a game idea first, or made something before they quit their jobs and then start pitching it around. And then obviously your solo dev of one who can kind of be pretty malleable, move around. There's a lot of developers out there right now on Twitter that are solo that just go gangbusters. I mean, it's pretty difficult, I would say, you really need to have games under your belt, or you need to be able to make games or have games that you put out there in order to really be a solo dev properly. But that's something that I'm experiencing right now. Yeah.
Would like finding some random person team on Discord or through Reddit count as indie studio, or?
You mean just getting up with like random people?
Yeah, collaborating on some project they have.
Sure. I mean, it depends. I mean, right? Like, indie is just it's just a term that you use. I mean, if it's just a few people, I mean, you don't have a publisher, right? I mean, it's very shoestring. You're not really in it to make the money. You're just there to make the game and then hopefully make some return. If you're holding out for like the big bucks, you might be in the wrong business on that end. But yeah, all that kind of stuff is fine. I mean, I luckily met a lot of great people over the years that I'm working with now that I really enjoy working with. So I think that's always a positive. So anytime you're going to school or whatever, just remember the people that you worked with, that you enjoy working with, because you'll probably end up working with them again in some capacity down the road. These are much larger topics to go down, but stuff to think about. A good example, like, so when you're building your portfolio for a game studio, I think this is a very common sense kind of thing for me, but build your portfolio towards the studio that you're applying for. Don't go all in, of course, but if you're applying at DICE, you should probably have some kind of first-person shooter multiplayer map thing. They have a lot of editors that you can make content for the older games. I don't know about the newer ones, but you can make an old Battlefield level, show them your skills in your abilities to use 3ds Max, I think is the tool they use over there, to build the content and, things like that. So if you're going to go for DICE, do that. If you're going to go for a card game studio, you should at least have some basic prototypes that you've play tested with friends, on like basic paper cards, that you've drawn yourself. Have some ideas, things that you want to cater towards the studio that you're going to apply for. As a quick note on like applying for studios, you don't always have to go for like the position you exactly want. A lot of people who don't have the experience necessary to get some of these positions, like a lot of level designers do come from QA. A lot of level designers come from QA. A lot of programmers, producers come from QA. People that show that they can manage their teams well, or if you're really good at QA, giving feedback to the people who are making the level. Hey, this part's really confusing for these reasons, here, here, and here. I think if you tweak this, it'll be better. You talk to the lead. You're like, hey, like I'm going to start in QA, but I really want to eventually get into a design position. Depending on the studio, they might be really up for helping you out. Like my position as lead when I was on Payday, I always tried to like look for people in QA who were excited about, or they at least were like, hey, I want to be a level designer. And then you kind of would sit back and see if they were really gung-ho about it, and if they were like downloading the editor on their workstation and working in the afternoon trying to learn it. That's the kind of stuff that really gets you noticed if you're jumping in from QA. But if you're just like, yeah, I want to be a level designer, you guys figured out for me, no one's gonna, you're not gonna end up there. But starting out in QA is a really great way of jumping in. So don't always feel bad if you're not, at your dream job right away. Like my wife's little brother's cousin or something was like, he was drawing characters, and he was like, yeah, I'm gonna work at like, I don't know, maybe I'll make like magazine covers or something. I just went over to his shelf and was like, can you make this? And he was like, I was like, okay, well, that's off the shelf, And I was being kind of rude, but it's like, you need to have a wake-up call sometimes when you're in these types of situations. He was like, well, I'm gonna make, I really enjoy playing Final Fantasy, so I'll just go and make their characters. And I was like, dude, what? And I was like, do you even have a process yet? Do you do thumbnail design first? Do you do this? It's like, no, I just like doing the details. It's like, okay, well, that's not how you make games. I mean, things are usually always malleable until at the last minute, and then you do the details afterwards. That stuff never happens. Like, good concept artists are people who can work on not concepting. They're like people who can like help you figure out a space. Like, I need this room to look really cool for combat. What do you think we could do? And then the artist is like, well, maybe we can tip over these desks and I'll draw a scene where it looks like a battle happened here or something, and they can generate ideas for you. That's the good kind of stuff. But when he was like, yeah, I'll do Final Fantasy characters, I was like, first of all, no, because their studios have people who are basically inbred from the ground up to do that for like, I mean, they have one guy that does all their covers and like things for like years. They're not going to just have you. I mean, you don't even speak Japanese. It's like how that they have standards too. I mean, there's so many things that you need to when you're applying. It's okay to start small and work your way up. If you don't have a good portfolio right away. Yeah.
Sorry, I really hate you before you're done. I really enjoyed your talk, but I have to take off. I didn't want to see what leave on you, but I really enjoyed you being here. And I said, I hope you do come back, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Thanks for stopping by. Like I said, you don't always have to reach for the top. You can start small in QA.
For QA. Are there any good websites to find gigs for that? Because I know that
you literally just go to like Gamma Sutra or something.
Well, sometimes it's like scams. They say like, "Hey, download my game and comment on Reddit, and I'll pay you $50." And I'm like,
that doesn't sound legit.
Yeah.
But no studios will ask you to do that. At least none that I've worked at.
I mean, how do you like? I know a lot of them. They have to have like a presence on like YouTube. And, like, it's like part of their marketing strategies that people test it and play and show it on YouTube.
I mean, just go through legit channels. Like most websites, like Starbreeze, you just go to Starbreeze, and if you want to be a QA at Blizzard, I'm sure they have like an army of like 300 QA testers playing WoW all the time and Overwatch or whatever. You can apply through their website QA, but it's good that you show like QA isn't just most of the time QA isn't just like I love playing games. It's good. You should love playing games if you're going to start in QA, but it's always good to have the extra an extra portfolio about like, this is me organized. This is my organizational skills. This is how I find bugs and comment. Like if you go to like forums, like Payday has a ton of bugs in it because of the way that we have to build super fast. So like being a QA tester and like breaking down how you found a bug and like what you did or how you reported it. I took a video, I took a screenshot, I made a description. You can give example reports. You can look up, and then if you have a portfolio or like a little side section that's like, I also do some QA stuff on the side. If you're going to apply for a QA position, you could just show them, that kind of thing, and you'll probably jump to the front of the list. But yeah, I mean, try and stay legit, I guess. I mean, just go through the websites. I mean, if you're going to apply for QA,
stuff,
apply at like a big studio.
Like breaking mechanics or something, like a new champion or something. A new hero comes out. I broke this champion, the hero, like by doing this strategy. Like I'm really good at doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you can record your process on like how you do it, and then like potentially like what they call reproduction steps, where you basically show them these are the exact steps to do it 100% of the time or whatever. That's always really good for people in QA to do that. Okay, so
is QA an hourly job?
No, I mean, generally they have people hired on staff to do QA, so you can literally just sit with the person that you're working with and just go through their content all day. We had a few people to play on Payday. Every time we're going to release a patch for our game on Steam, which is really easy to do, but every time we go to do that, all of QA has to play through every level in the game and make sure that it runs, and they have to try out all these different types of weapons, and it just starts to bloat more and more and more and more. So we have a lot of people on staff for that. And then other times, like Activision, when I was working on Black Ops Zombies, they had like an underground bunker that they would bring in people from different ways of life. Like they would bring in the professional zombie players. There was like 4 guys that they would bring in. Then there was the medium crowd that had played it a bunch online. Then they had some more people like that, but then they had people who have never played first-person shooters or even held a console before. And the results were generally the same when you looked at the groups. Like these guys were amazing at destroying your level. These guys were like okay at hitting the high numbers. The people over here could barely start and like get past level 3, and that was just, you know, that's how it worked. I'm sorry, what was the question again? I lost my.
You answered it.
Oh, I did? Okay, but yeah, they basically have people on stuff, but like they'll bring in people sometimes. Activision pays people in games, like when they bring them in, they're like, we have a big catalog of console games that you can just look through, and they don't pay you money for that sometimes. But other times you might be able to find a job with a QA firm, but it's like a big warehouse, and then it's just a bunch of sweaty people sitting in a room playing games. Yeah, and then we can skip this going indie thing because that's just, you know, we already covered that. These are some fun games to play. If you guys haven't played any of these games, I definitely recommend it. Try picking apart the things that you really enjoyed about them. These top ones were they were indie studios, but this was from my narrative games talk that I did. These top ones are indie, the lower ones are not, but they all have some really great narrative themes in them or ways to set up your content levels. I did a bunch of breakdowns on Half-Life 2 Episode 2 when I was at the school, showing like great ways to set up scenes and things like that, if you're into that kind of thing. But these games are really awesome. Inside is a really amazing game. Pretty much everything in that game is like, ooh, like every screen you go to is like an amazing concept piece or something like that. It's a really great game.
Going back to narrative design, a lot of these tell, or at least Inside and Zoo and Little Nightmares, they tell a lot just by not even having dialogue.
Yeah, no, I would say Brothers doesn't have dialogue. They use like sim noises, but a lot of the stuff is done through mechanics. That's another thing that I'm really that I love about games is like teaching things through mechanics. When I taught my 2-week course, we weren't allowed to have text in our games, and a lot of students they rely on yellow outlines, God shaders, things like that to like show like, oh, you have to pull this lever. But in reality, if you taught it correctly, you wouldn't need that. You know, it's a band-aid for design. But a lot of these games don't have that because they're really great at how they show their mechanics and tell their stories. And Resident Evil, they just amazing layouts on all fronts. Here's some game engines. You guys probably are familiar with these. I was going to talk about the differences, but we kind of already covered that in one of the other questions. Like I said, if you want to get in the industry and do AAA stuff, find a AAA game that has an engine out with it, or whatever, a modding pack. They have all the materials and models and enemies already made. You can literally just start jumping in and start making cool content for those games. There's some books to read. Disclaimer: I haven't read all these yet, but I do own them. But like when I was at Irrational, like a lot of these were talked about. I mean, I own 101 Things I Learned at Architecture School is amazing for like game design and level design in general. They have a lot of good practices and philosophies that you should learn. I honestly pick up that book and I read it once a year at least. It's a really great one. And The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses, was done by a man named Jesse Schell. He owns a studio in Philadelphia. Really awesome guy. Schell Games, and that book is really great as well. It's like a whole way of looking at game design through just different eyes, different disciplines and different lenses. Really amazing. It's a pretty big book, but worthwhile. And then just some other things like the design of everyday things. The Hows and Whys of level design was done by a guy in Sweden who's really popular. I only know him by Horensis. His real name is actually kind of hard to say. I think he goes by Short. And then Painting with Light, that's just like a functional lighting book. This was mostly for my narrative students to look at. I just had this slide on here. But yeah, if you Google any of these and put .pdf afterwards, a lot of times Google will find an online version that you can just like start scrolling through. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it for now. like I said, there's tons of stuff to go over. Recapping, check out MapCore if you want to like get into more level design stuff. What else did I have? Yeah, keep an eye out for my studio, Wicked Hitbox. We'll be doing a lot of stuff in the next few months. Yeah, that's me for
Plan
now.
on starting an office in Memphis for Wicked Hitbox?
Depending on how things go, I might. Yeah, for sure. I was looking at right now. I'm just looking for an apartment to settle into that's close to like everything. So.
Do you have like an ArtStation account that we can just follow you on?
I don't have an ArtStation account, but I do have a website. I don't know if I can edit this. Let me just see. This is my personal site. Oh, and I have a blog as well that like shows my process. I'll have another talk about prototyping and stuff like that too, because that's a really big deal. And kind of goes along with what we were talking about. But yeah, I just have a website. It's just generalvv.com. And I mean, I have a Twitter account as well. You can see my simple one page of just like all the things that I worked on, and you can click on any of these, and there's like videos and like all the little things that I did while I was there. What else is there? Yeah, so Twitter.
Hey, did you do the parasol scene?
The parasol scene?
In Bioshock Infinite?
What was that one again?
It was like it's loading the screen, and then the parasol like kind of goes across the screen, and it disguises the loading. It's on the beach.
Oh.
Bioshock Infinite.
Mm-hmm.
They did a whole thing on GDC about that.
Oh yeah. I actually did. I did that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I worked on the beach level.
That was like that was really cool because they disguised. They had a problem with the loading of that level, so they used an artistical element like that to disguise, so you can see the pop-ins, and it just goes across the screen. It adds a whole like dimension to the scene, which I thought was kind of
there's tons of like fun things like that. We could talk about little level design and things that you can do to like, I mean, loading and optimization is like a whole art form in itself. Naughty Dog and the Uncharted series, they have a lot of tools like mechanics that allow them to stream things in, like, or stream out. Like anytime Drake drops a sign or he's climbing, they usually use those sections to stream in things.
Yeah.
Because he'll break the ledge and then you can't go back. And as soon as they break the ledge, they get rid of like an entire level behind you. And then they move forward knowing that you can't go back. We do similar things like in here. This is the lower half of the beach, and then we use this little room here to bring you to the top deck over here by the little Ferris wheel, and we use that as like a streaming section to load and unload because there's a lot of animations and things that we set up on the beach for like Elizabeth to interact with and stuff. So there's lots of little tricks and things like that. And then we have there's like a cloud reveal, like behind this cloud is the statue that you just blew up, and then when you get to the top, the cloud dissipates and you can see the statue, and there's a whole lot of framing techniques and things like that we use. It's really good stuff. And then my Twitter account is just same thing, General VV or at General VV. If you guys want to follow me, whatever. I try and just post stuff related to game dev. I'm not like political in any way. I don't care who's running for president, whatever. And then my other account is the one that I'm working on with my buddies. We just post a lot of screenshot stuff like enemies and high poly stuff that we're working on, and we just started this one. But yeah, that's me. I appreciate you guys for taking the time to hang out and listen to me. Yeah, I don't know what time it is.